Good morning, everybody. Last week, we had some terrible news that broke last Saturday. We had 3 Americans who were ultimately murdered in an attack that the U.S. government is claiming to be ISIS. You had 2 soldiers and an American civilian interpreter, and I believe 3 other Americans and 2 other Syrian army men were also injured in the attack. I know that we want to get into this and kind of talk about the area that was hit and with the senator's expertise on that since he had been there. So I want to go ahead and pass it to you, Senator.
Yes. Well, thank you, Morgan. And glad to have all of our visitors here on the last show before the Christmas holiday, and wish all of you the very best for Christmas. We're going to touch on Palmyra, the death of the American soldiers, and also a civilian who's never quite been identified. But first, there's just something that Morgan and I were talking about before we came on the air. There was a very interesting political event that occurred back, I guess, a week ago. Tucker Carlson was on a show, and he and I'm not sure whether that was with Judge Napolitano. It may have been, but in any event, he made a very specific prediction. He said that the president will announce that we are going to war with Venezuela, and that he will announce it at like 10 o'clock tomorrow, and which was kind of stunning. And obviously he wouldn't have come up with something with that specificity had he not had some pretty good information. And Tucker Carlson has a lot of contacts that are very highly placed. So we all kind of expected, well, this is going to happen. It's been predicted, the exact time and so forth. And then the president made a very major address to the nation, and nothing. There's just no mention of Venezuela whatsoever. And so in discussions that I had with the Schiller Institute, with the Executive Intelligence Review, their assessment was that what had happened was that there was a vote held in the House of Representatives, and there was a big push on to require the administration to comply with the War Powers Resolution relative to Venezuela. If they were going to do something, that they had to notify Congress, and they had to go through all the procedure. Now, normally you would expect something like that to, get a few votes and then go down and you'd move on. But in this case, I'm not sure why there was so little news about it, but in this case, apparently the measure almost passed, and it reflected enormous resistance within Congress to an invasion of Venezuela. Mm-hmm. And so, Morgan, what are your thoughts on that?
Yes, I think we were talking backstage, and there was 9 representatives that opted not to vote, and I think there was only 2 that was needed to get this passed. I think it's frustrating in the sense that this War Powers Resolution Act was to reaffirm the powers that are vested in the Constitution, that Congress is supposed to establish war. And so you have your representatives that are abdicating their power, not even on the question of whether we should go or not, but whether they should have the say, which it was already invested in them through the Constitution. So it's really alarming when we have some considerable amount of representatives that are willing to release their power, even on the simple question of, that should be settled, as that who declares war officially. So that's kind of what I took from it, was just this just degradation of respect of the Constitution, where we're supposed to have these checks and balances. And, you know, we vote in our representative to represent our, you know, our district. And so we have a more of a direct say on whether or not we want to engage in further war, which I think how we saw that this almost passed was this overwhelming appetite from the American people that they don't want war. And I think that you see a considerable amount of representatives that are saying, I guess I have to reclaim the power to say that we have this power, because I know that my constituents probably will be really upset if, you know, another war breaks out and I did nothing. So that's kind of my takeaway from it, is that first, some of the people that abdicated the power, they should really hold their head in shame, because that is, you know, one of the bare minimum requirements of them to be in that position is, you know, to follow the Constitution and to, you know, that's part of their duties is to, you know, to formally declare war instead of allowing a president to unilaterally declare war, kind of like how we've been doing since 9/11. So those were my kind of takeaways from it.
Well, you know, your what you say is precisely correct, and it's, I mean, it's kind of interesting for me to hear you say it, because you come from a much different generation. I come from a generation where we have just become so accustomed to having presidents one after the other. I don't know anybody that you could declare was a peace president, unless maybe it was Ronald Reagan. But they declare war over. They don't go to Congress. They just simply say, oh, we've got this emergency. I went off to Vietnam under the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. There was never a declaration of war. It was it was a resolution. It's a way that Congress can back a war and kind of do it, you know, from their hip pocket without actually going online to say, okay, I am putting my name on here as a supporter of the war. So I have heard this over and over. It is crystal clear in the United States Constitution that Congress has the power to declare war. But most wars, people don't even think about it. You know, we had Obama, when we were talking about Syria, Obama declared any number of times there will be no boots on the ground. And he would pound the table, no boots on the ground. And then he sent troops in to invade Syria. And they've been ever since, they've occupied the northern part of Syria. And now President Trump comes along. He sends troops, American troops, into the areas around Damascus, more in the southern part. So now we're occupying the north, we're occupying the south. Nobody in Congress has even thought twice about this. Well, what are we doing? Why are we in Syria? Why didn't we just pull out of Syria? I thought this evil tyrant, the constitutionally elected and reelected president of Syria, Bashar al-Assad, was removed. And now this wonderful fellow, al-Shara, comes along, and he's going to save everybody, and well, let's just get out of there. Well, it's a lot more complicated than that. So, but nobody in Congress even thought, well, wait a minute, maybe we ought to, let's put something else on this resolution about Venezuela. Let's tack on something about, let's not go into Syria anymore. Let's stop that. And we're fighting wars everywhere. I mean, I can't count how many wars I work on this stuff all the time. We're fighting wars against Yemen, against Iran, against any number of places.
Somalia, yeah, it's
Somalia. What are we doing? I mean, half of the time, I suspect some some well-heeled guy walks in and puts money on the table for a bunch of senators, and they say, good to go. Yeah, we'll send some troops, we'll drop some bombs, and off we go. Our foreign policy, our military policy is insane. It does not serve the interests of the American people. Well, anyway, let me shift over to this incident that we're principally talking about today. We had 2 U.S. soldiers and a civilian American. I don't know whether this is a CIA agent or who it was, but I think he was supposed to be an interpreter. But 3 Americans who died in a city called Palmyra, which is a very historically important place. It's not a big city, but it's in the kind of in the center of Syria. And ISIS, the terror group ISIS, has long sought to capture Palmyra, and they did capture Palmyra. This was back in 2016. The ISIS was the predominant force fighting against President Bashar al-Assad. Now, Assad, you hear lots of things said about him. He was an elected president. They say, well, he's a dictator. A dictator is what we have in Saudi Arabia. No individual has ever voted for the crown prince of Saudi Arabia. Not one vote, not one person, not one man, not one woman. Well, women don't vote. They can't vote anyway in Saudi Arabia. But that is a dictator. Syria had a constitution, and under the constitution, there were certain rules about how you conducted elections, and even in the midst of wartime, President Assad and his administration, very carefully complied with the Constitution and held very widely participated in elections. The people of Syria would pour out to the polls, and so he was duly elected. He was legitimately elected. He was elected under the Constitution that the Parliament had developed, and so we call him a dictator because the American people are to know nothing about what we're really doing in foreign policy. I mean, that is a fact. When it comes to all of these wars and hot spots, we know almost nothing. Well, anyway, so the United States set about toppling the government of Syria at the very, very outset of the Syrian civil war. Now, this began in 2011. We had just managed to topple the nation of Libya, absolutely destroyed the most advanced nation in Africa, left it in ruins, and it has remained in ruins ever since. We then quickly shifted over, and we sent the Central Intelligence Agency into Syria to coordinate with various dissident groups, and the principal one that we worked with was Al-Qaeda. Now, they went by the name of Al-Nusra initially, and they were in every respect of the word, a terrorist organization. They were part of the global Al-Qaeda movement, and Americans should realize that Al-Qaeda was the group that flew the jet aircraft into the Pentagon and into the Twin Towers on 9/11 back in 2001 and killed 3,000 Americans. Many of the Americans in the Twin Towers leapt to their death, a quarter of a mile to their death, rather than be incinerated in the inferno. So you would think that the United States would just have this intractable hatred for Al-Qaeda, because after all, no force has ever killed so many Americans ever. And yet 10 years after 9/11, all of a sudden we formed an unwavering alliance with Al-Qaeda in Syria. And we, through the CIA, we helped to orchestrate the movement of jihadists from 100 different nations into Syria to attempt to overthrow the constitutional government and to overwhelm the will, the distinct will of the Syrian people. We armed them. There was a secret program, Timber Sycamore, that was run by the Central Intelligence Agency, and it was later disclosed, and now you can find it online very easily. We set up warehouses all along the Syrian border, right across into Turkey, and the Central Intelligence Agency actually operated those warehouses. Now, these weren't little warehouses, these were huge, almost like individual bases. And they had their own security. There were floods of tanks and artillery and all sorts of modern weapons of war. And the CIA orchestrated this great movement within Syria to overthrow the government, the legitimately elected government of Bashar al-Assad. Now, I created an earthquake in 2015 by simply sending a letter to President Assad. And what had happened, there was a movement along the border between Syria and Lebanon. And the Syrian army had carried out a masterful campaign where they drove Al-Qaeda from the mountains, and the Al-Qaeda forces, they were called Al-Nusra, they went under Al-Nusra, they were governed by the new president of Syria, who now calls himself Al-Shara. But in any event, they had captured 13 Catholic nuns. They held the nuns as human shields. And in the end, after the Syrian army had defeated Al-Nusra, the remaining leaders were meeting together in a house. And at that same house, they had the 13 women. And through an incredible intelligence operation, the Syrian government of Bashar al-Assad got in. They extracted the 13 nuns, brought them out safely. They detonated the building. They dropped it, killed all of the leaders of Al-Nusra who were meeting there. So I wrote a letter, and I told President Assad, I said, I want to thank you for the, not thank you, I said, I want to thank the Syrian Arab Army for its valiant attack against Al-Qaeda, the very group that killed 3,000 Americans on 9/11. And especially I want to thank them for rescuing the 13 Roman Catholic nuns who were being held as human shields. When that was released, there had been a total blackout on the truth in the media, and there was just an earthquake. this one letter that I sent, it just sent shockwaves around the world, and it was being reported all over the place. The Washington Post called, and anyway, we started getting hundreds and hundreds of calls coming in, and many of them supportive, but many of them were hostile. And we set up procedures in my Senate office. I said, look, here's what we do. You talk with the ones calling in. If they're on our side, just make a record of them. If they're against us, I want to talk to them personally, and I'll talk to everybody, one after the other. And I spent days and days just talking on the phone. Most of the people, after they heard what was actually going on in Syria, the majority of them agreed with me, and those who didn't, with one exception, always said, well, you've got a really good understanding of what's going on, and you've got very good reasons. We just disagree, and that's fine, you know. The only exception was the head of Al Jazeera, or he was an official with Al Jazeera. I think he was the editor. And he was very intensely hostile. But keep in mind that Al-Qaeda, or not Al-Qaeda, but Qatar was working along with Saudi Arabia to supply weapons to this Al-Qaeda group that called itself Al-Nusra. And so Al Jazeera was a mouthpiece for the government, and so they naturally would be hostile. But at any event, it sort of broke loose the silence, and after that, you had many voices. I went to Syria to examine what was going on, and when I returned, then Tulsi Gabbard followed in reasonably short order, and so in any event, when I went, there had just been this enormous ISIS attack on Palmyra. Now, ISIS had rather mysterious beginnings because the United States had formed this enormous supply of modern weaponry, funding, all kinds of things in a city of Iraq, and it was mysteriously captured by ISIS, a handful of ISIS people. The Iraqi generals were not there at the time. There was nobody in charge, and all of a sudden you had this great big Iraqi armed force that was conquered by a handful of ISIS. I suspect it was an intelligence operation. I would not be surprised if it had been orchestrated by the CIA to make sure that they could then capture all of these modern tanks, artillery, all of the best weaponry, and then that's what they did in any event, whether it was done by the CIA or some other reason. They took all these American weapons and they formed a number of heavy and mechanized divisions that began to roar across the desert and capture a great swath of Syria and of Iraq. And then they formed the Islamic Caliphate that was headquartered in Raqqa, Syria. And so the United States, we're always trying to pretend that we're one thing when we're really the other. And so we formed a coalition against ISIS. And there were many, many countries, European countries, and even some Arab countries. And we formed this coalition. It was mostly air power. And the idea was we were going to resist ISIS. So when I went to Syria in 2016, something rather shocking had happened, and I'm sure it was not something that made the CIA very happy. But this great Islamic army under ISIS, and certainly with the assistance of al-Nusra, which was Al-Qaeda in Syria, but principally it was ISIS. They roared across the desert with this huge mechanized force. 100 miles they had to travel in open desert, and they attacked the ancient city of Palmyra, which was a World Heritage site that had structures that went back 5,000 years before the birth of Christ. And it was just this enormous historical site. And ISIS went in, and then they began to systematically blow down and destroy all of these places to destroy the history of Syria. And so the Syrian army, it looked as though the Syrian army was about to collapse and that ISIS would simply drive on into Damascus. And then the Syrian army just rallied, and after they had been driven out of Palmyra, they rallied, they counterattacked, and in one of the most dramatic military operations that I've ever seen, they captured an ancient fortress, a huge castle that overlooked the town of Palmyra, and I think we may have a photo of the generals who are describing for me the battle. Yes, this is it here. This where we're standing, if you'll notice, it's the soil there is made up of stony gravel. It's very loose gravel, and there was this very large ridge that climbed up towards the castle, and it was bare. There was not a tree on it. There was not a shrub. There was nothing. It was just this rock like you see there. And the generals were pointing out to me where they had staged troops. They had moved them in. There was down sort of on in the valley area. There was a large area of trees, and they had infiltrated there, and then they attacked up this bare open area. The Syrian people were very patriotic, and you would not know that from anything you've read in the media, but they fought with enormous courage to preserve their country. The general who was leading this force personally led that force. He ran up this tremendous ridge line in the wide open. He ran towards the walls of the castle. Up in the castle, you had these ISIS troops who were firing down at the completely exposed Syrians, and they killed the general. They killed the Syrian general who led the charge. And in any event, the Syrian army then overwhelmed ISIS and recaptured the castle. And from there, they began to attack down, and they recaptured the town of Palmyra, and they drove ISIS out of the city. Now, when I arrived there, there was fighting going on in the outskirts of the city, and so wherever I went, I was guarded by a force of probably, I don't know, there may have been 50 sort of like Secret Service, very, very elite troops who followed me everywhere that I wanted to go. So this was ISIS. The CIA, I think, had been very, they were very happy to see ISIS. They just wanted the government, the Syrian government, overthrown. They didn't care who it was or how vile they were. And certainly ISIS was a very vile organization. But there is a photo, I think, that you have, Morgan, where I was very angry because I was talking to the press. The press followed me all around there. They're very interested, not just the Syrian press, but the Middle Eastern press. And I was just furious about the fact that here we had this great coalition with all of these, hundreds and hundreds of jet aircraft ready to intervene. And yet ISIS, with this enormous army, traveled 100 miles over wide open desert to reach Palmyra. And not a single bomb was dropped on them. Now, I don't care how incompetent we might have been, and I don't think we were incompetent. You would have to be blind not to see this vast army with the tremendous clouds of dust it was kicking up behind it, with all of its trucks and its tanks and its artillery pieces. You had to know that this ISIS army was headed towards Damascus, and yet not a single bomb was dropped. So it just shows how artificial all of the things that we do over there have been. So the Syrian people orchestrated, they worked very hard. And now, meanwhile, there was a schism between ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Now, the big man for ISIS, the head of ISIS, actually designated Mohammed Julani, who changed his name. He's now the president of Syria. The president of Syria, Mr. Al-Julani, Mohammed Al-Julani, was a part of ISIS, and then he was designated to set up Al-Qaeda in Syria under the name of al-Nusra, and he did set up. Yes, this is the man. The United States. He was the first leader of Al-Qaeda ever identified by the United States, and of course, at the time, this is early in the Syrian war, we still had people within our government who were very angry about the Al-Qaeda's 9/11 attacks on the United States. And I think there probably were some elements of the federal government who said, well, we're just going to call a spade a spade. This guy is a terrorist. It would be very interesting to know the dynamics of why the CIA was supporting this man, where it says stop this terrorist. CIA was actively arming, supplying, providing diplomatic cover, planning attacks with this man that we say stop this terrorist. And then there are other elements of the federal government that have a $10 million bounty on his head. And in the literature talking about stop this terrorist, they describe him as being the head of al-Nusra, which is Al-Qaeda in Syria. So the American history in Syria is a very, very sordid affair, and very, very corrupted. Now, I wanted to mention, and it's probably appropriate at Christmas time, that one of the fundamental things with the Syrian constitution, they guaranteed freedom of speech, freedom of religion, very strong on freedom of religion, and very strong on women's rights. And as you know, women have no rights in most of the Middle Eastern countries. Women are viewed a little bit more as property, a little bit more like slaves were here in the United States back during the times of slavery. But it was totally different in Syria. The Constitution really emphasized women's rights. The Parliament of Syria had a great number of women. I don't know whether it was probably a quarter to a third of the entire parliament were women, and the women were Sunni Muslims, they were Shia Muslims, they were Druze, they were Kurds, they were Christians, they were Alawi, and the nation was represented by its people within the parliament. And so from the outset, this fellow Al-Jilani, the terrorist on the wanted poster, conducted a campaign of enormous terror, and they followed 7th century Islamic law, the very primitive law that allowed for enslavement of women. So if you captured a woman in battle, then she belonged to you, just like a goat or a horse or something like that. She was yours to do with what you pleased, and this included little girls too. This was not just grown women, but this was very young children. Under Al-Qaeda's law, you could have relations with a child, I think starting at 9 years old, but as a practical matter, there really was no limit. It didn't matter. The child belonged to you. The female child belonged to you as property. You could sell her. You could sell that child. You could sell the woman. If anyone that you captured, you could sell her. And the law of Al-Qaeda, which is the same as the law of ISIS, is that those who do not believe in Muhammad as the great prophet and Allah as the God, if you don't believe that, then the punishment is beheading. And you'll often hear them say, well, yes, but they can avoid beheading if they pay the jizya. The jizya is a special tax for non-believers. But the trick is that you never will see this. The trick is that the jizya must be paid in gold, which means that only wealthy people can avoid forced conversion. Poor people are beheaded. Either they convert or they're beheaded. And so these are the rules that are followed by today's government in Syria, and they have always been followed by Al-Qaeda, just as they are with ISIS. So let me shift. Oh, I did want to show a couple of the photos that I have. as I went around Syria on this first and also successive visits, everywhere I went, there was evidence of enormous religious vitality, both in the Syrian or in the Islamic arena and in the Christian arena. When most of Syria was recaptured by Bashar al-Assad, the first thing he did is he put tremendous emphasis on rebuilding Christian churches, Muslim mosques. And now this is a very interesting thing that happened. I had this group of Syrian soldiers who drove me through no man's land from Palmyra to Homs city. Homs is a big city of Syria, and there I went around. I saw all kinds of things, and often they'd be things where I would just say, well, I want to go and see this, and whatever I wanted, they would do. And so I was asked, would you like to go to the big playhouse in the center of Homs City? They said, there's a presentation tonight. So I went, and I was very awkward because we actually arrived late and they were already underway. And I'm always embarrassed when I do that, and particularly if I'm creating kind of a splash by doing it. And I went in, and so quietly sat down there. We actually were introduced, and then I quietly sat down, and I began to watch. And for some reason, with the lighting and everything, I was focused on this woman who's singing. She was a very, very lovely woman, and her songs are very beautiful. And I had watched her for a while, and then my gaze shifted to some of the choral members who were singing as backup with her. And then, well, it's very clear here, but at the time it was not quite as clear on the screen. I was suddenly shocked because I looked at the screen, and here is an image of Jesus Christ on the cross. And keep in mind, Homs City is dominantly Muslim, Sunni Muslim, probably 90% Sunni Muslim. And so I turned to the regional head of this area of Homs, and actually his wife. I was talking to her. She was next to me, and they were both Muslim, and I said to her, I said, is this a Christian playhouse or something? And she said, no. She said, no, this is the main playhouse in Homs City. I said, well, I'm surprised that I'm seeing images of Christ on the cross. And she said, well, this is just the way we are in Syria. And Syria was really famous for religious harmony. It wasn't religious tolerance. It was harmony. It was sort of a love and appreciation of one another. And then she told me, she said most of the members of the choir are Muslims, and yet they're singing Easter songs about Jesus Christ, and not just songs about the Islamic recognition of Jesus Christ as a prophet among many, but singing songs about Easter, about the resurrection from the dead of Jesus Christ in a Christian perspective. And I saw this repeatedly all over Syria, this tremendous respect that people had for one another's religion. And of course, for Christians, this was a matter of life and death. And so the Christians always were very supportive of Bashar al-Assad. And in any event, this sort of characterized the nation back in those days. Well, so bring it up to the current times, this fellow, Mohammed al-Jilani, the terrorist that you showed on the screen earlier, he eventually emerged. After 13 years of war, then suddenly there's an undercover operation between the CIA, Mossad of Israel, the Turkish intelligence, everyone descending on the Syrian government. By then, we had starved them, we had deprived them of fuel, we had devalued their currency, we had left the nation hollowed out, and so the country fell to Al-Qaeda, and then this fellow Al-Jilani, the bearded jihadist that you saw with the $10 million bounty on him, threw out his uniform. He put on a suit and tie and slicked down his hair. He changed his name to Al-Shara, and he said, I'm a moderate, and now I want the support of the world. And the United States, oh, hallelujah, the tyrant Bashar al-Assad, who backed freedom of speech, freedom of religion, women's rights. That tyrant is gone. And now this wonderful fellow is going to come in. The wonderful fellow immediately rescinded the Constitution because under Islamic law, you must not have women's rights in a constitution. That's forbidden. So anyway, now we discover that U.S. soldiers are operating in Palmyra. And this news came up about a week ago, and it said the U.S. soldiers were ambushed by ISIS. And in fact, that is not what had happened. But as soon as this happened, President Trump came out, he sort of declared vengeance against ISIS. We're going to get even for the killing of U.S. soldiers. But the claim that the U.S. soldiers were ambushed by ISIS was simply false. There is some question about the precise killings, but South Front reported that it was actually a suicide bomber who was a member of the Syrian security forces of the new government, the Al-Qaeda government. And there was a visit between a U.S. Army officer and the Syrian official in Palmyra. And during that meeting, one of the bodyguards for the Syrian government official set off a suicide bomb, which killed the Americans. Now, there is very little credible evidence that the bomber or the shooter, whichever you think he might have been, that was connected with ISIS in any respect. He was a Syrian government guard protecting a Syrian official. He might have had some sympathy with ISIS, but just as easily he might have had a grudge against the Syrian official. He might have been trying to kill the man he was guarding, or he might have easily decided, well, I'm going to kill Americans. This is my opportunity to become a martyr. I'm going to kill Americans. It's probably the most likely explanation. But it was interesting because the immediate narrative we put out was that there'd been an ambush, ISIS had ambushed, had killed these Americans, we're going to get even. So after that very convenient false narrative was widely disseminated, then there were some more sober reports published. One of these was on December 14th in the New York Times, where the headline read, "Syrian who killed U.S. soldiers was a member of security forces," officials say. And then they went on and they said 3 other American service members and 2 members of the Syrian security forces, who remember are Al-Qaeda, they were also wounded in the attack. So you've got considerable number of Americans and Syrians wounded in the attack. You have Syrians who are killed. You have U.S. soldiers killed, and this mysterious U.S. civilian. And just the fact that there are so many people killed and wounded suggests that this was probably not a shooting. It probably was a suicide bombing, because everybody is heavily armed in these, even in these meetings. And the idea that that somebody is just picking off people one by one, kind of unlikely. But in any event, both the Syrian government and the American officials claimed without the slightest trace of evidence that all of this was carried out by ISIS. Now, this, of course, has led to President Trump mobilizing U.S. forces. We conducted massive bombings all over Syria. We've been bombing Syria for a generation now, and there's no indication that we will not be bombing Syria, killing Syrian people with American bombs when you're a grandmother. That could be happening. ISIS has always been a convenient excuse for sending U.S. troops to Syria. So the idea is that we have to avenge ourselves because we had people killed. We got to avenge ourselves by sending more troops there to fight, to be killed. And I don't. What do you think of that, Morgan? You're the one who's going to be paying the price for this.
Yeah, I mean, it's just this endless cycle of violence. And it's very unfortunate because we don't have any kind of definitive foreign policy goal in the region that our representatives can articulate to us. It's kind of like, just like you said, oh, we got to just get revenge after this last hit. Well, you know, why were they there? Because it's almost like, okay, we're asking for it if they continue to be there after, you know, it's because it's just this perpetual cycle of, okay, we get them back, and then that's their mentality, is that they got to get us back, and it's just this tit for tat, you know, continual just waste of life, honestly. So that's kind of where I stand, is that there's really no definitive goal that we have. I mean, definitive goal in the, you know, that was said in the Obama administration is, okay, this Bashar al-Assad regime has to go. And now we ushered in this new regime that was supposed to bring in this time of peace and revolution, is kind of what they said. And it's still the same status quo of these different factions, radical factions that are, you know, out for blood for invaders that they see, or how, you know, we see it. It's just this continual cycle of violence that doesn't need to really take place. You know, we have so many issues domestically that, you know, we have this foreign policy that sends our troops, and I think we have over 800 bases. It's just not a feasible and sustainable way to conduct ourselves when we have a country, like we've said on the show before, that's $30 trillion in debt. You know, now we're looking at engagements within our own hemisphere, as Pete Hegseth says. It's not a winning game, and we keep kind of doing this. You know, what's the the product of insanity is to keep doing the same thing over and over again that doesn't bear any fruit. We haven't had any successful regime change. We mentioned Libya, Afghanistan, Iraq, all of these countries that are in far worse places than they were when we initially engaged with them. And we keep conducting that same kind of foreign policy. So that's kind of my take, is just it's overall tragic. And we need to really kind of look at ourselves and ask ourselves, throughout what we've conducted on that same policy front of, okay, we need to take out this regime. Has it ever left that country in a better spot? And I don't think so.
Yeah, I can't think of any country that is better off because of these wars we've been fighting since 9/11. Typically, the countries are just ravaged. There are millions of people who die. There are people left in poverty. All of the infrastructure is destroyed. Libya is just a great example where we promised we were going to bring democracy, and instead we brought nothing but death, war, and we have deliberately blocked an election from ever occurring in Libya because we know that the wrong people are going to be elected. They're not going to be our puppets, and so we just block the elections. So now it does appear to me that the strategy that we're following, it is all driven by Israeli military policy. And it looks like the purposes of the U.S. troops is there to act as a fulcrum to balance the warring factions within Syria in order to maintain a permanent state of chaos with instability, war, death. And the idea is to weaken the Syrian nation, the people that make up Syria, by constantly having them with these internal struggles that they didn't exist when the Bashar al-Assad and his father before him were the heads of the nation. You didn't have all of this chaos and slaughter occurring.
Yeah, I think it's a very beneficial that you brought up the point of Israel, because I think that's probably the only country we can point to that has had kind of a benefit from this destabilization. They're taking land in Syria. Some of their harshest critics are now no longer alive through some of our actions. We've had Benjamin Netanyahu come to the House floor and advocate for, regime change in Iraq, that it would, paraphrasing here, that would funnel in a peace all over the Middle East is kind of what he said. And, it has kind of done the complete opposite of that. And then now he's kind of having the same rhetoric about Iran. I know that's the last country that General Wesley Clark had said was on our seven nations, 5 years war. And that's kind of something we need to keep in mind too, because I think that ultimately is written to the benefit of Israel, in that kind of their lust for more land, to kind of not cater to international law and what the Palestinian wishes are. And all of those countries are kind of advocating for there to be some kind of pushback on Israel's land grab in the West Bank, what they've done in Gaza. And now that they are no longer they have issues domestically because their country's in turmoil, they can't set focus on holding Israel to be a good neighbor. So I think that is a really good point, is that Israel kind of is engaged in this matter far more than we like to perceive them, or that the media likes to perceive them to be. They're far more engaged in kind of the handlings of how, why we're there and why we're still there. And in a sense, having our troops there as sitting ducks to keep us further engaged at their behest, because they don't have the type of capability to extend the way we've extended.
Yeah, and I think, it's not that our presidents are necessarily wanting our troops to be sitting ducks, but it's necessary for them to be there to facilitate what the Israelis are doing. And their strategy clearly has been to create all sorts of conflicts among the various factions in the nations, the Middle East, to keep them in a total state of war, conflict, hatred, death, and it's been very effective. I mean, they've driven people from Palestine and replaced all of the indigenous people, some of whom were, well, most of whom were Muslim, but many of whom were Christians.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's tremendous evangelical support for Israel, but very few of the evangelicals, very wonderful, sincere people, very few of them recognize that Christianity has almost been extinguished within the nation of Israel. It used to be a very powerful, robust force back when there used to be a coin in Palestine with 3 interlocking rings representing the 3 major faiths. You had Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. And all of them were prominent blocks, and I think there was this same feeling of religious harmony, of respecting one another, and then the European Jewish community came over and had to have homes and farms and so forth, and simply drove the owners of the farms and homes out, and of course caused enormous conflict. But anyway, we'll see where this all takes us. I think there's going to come a time, if we don't stop, where we're going to go bankrupt. And this whole military enterprise that we support, and I love the military. I've shed blood for the military. My radio men died right beside me fighting. These are great people. Our troops are tremendous, decent, patriotic people who don't have a clue what they're fighting for. But at some point, all of these wars that we're fighting for globalist bankers and hedge funds, they're going to bankrupt us, and the whole thing's going to come falling down. Mm-hmm. At that point, I don't know what will happen to Israel if we're in a position where we can no longer finance armadas to go over and conduct these wars for them.
Yes, it's certainly not sustainable, and I know we've gone over time. It's been a great show, and it's always a benefit to hear your firsthand experience going into Syria and trying to wake some of the American population up to some of our foreign policy. So I appreciate you, Senator, and all you do. And I want to make a mention that we won't be live next week. We won't have a show, just given the fact we will be with our families, just enjoying the holidays, and we hope that you all are doing the same. We will see you in the new year. So with that, I would like to say, Merry Christmas to you, Senator, and we'll have a blessed new year, and hopefully that'll usher in some peace and some prosperity for our own people and nation. So with that, I want to encourage everybody to tune in the next year, and thank you for everything you do, Senator.
Merry Christmas.